Hello and welcome to Furious Driving and out to the garage in my lovely old Rover 2000. And this episode has a bit of a kids today don't know they're born. It's not like it was in our day, and paper bag and gutter, you should think yourself lucky kind of a theme to it. And this all comes from a friend of mine who recently bought his son his first ever car. And it's not like it was in our day. Instead of getting a £250 clunker from the back pages of Exchange and Mart with filler and last week's Daily Mirror in the wings, and you could tell when the repair was done because it's still got the date on the newspaper, it's actually rather nice. And the cars that Gen Zers are learning to drive in and heading off on their first automotive adventures are boringly sensible, reliable, well-spec'd, well, grown up. Unlike the coat hanger and filler bodged wheels that their parents, us, set out in all those years ago. I'm sitting here in my Rover 2000, which is perhaps not entirely representative of a 17-year-old's car, but this is what I drove to college in when I was 17 to go and do my A-levels, go to my first weekend jobs, and, well, go to the pub on a Saturday night in. Now, although it wasn't as nice as this inside back in those days, it is very representative of 1990s new driver spec in terms of amenities. Of course, the cars me and my friends aspired to back then are now the modern classics of today, and yes, I know how old that makes me feel and sound. And the cars we could actually afford back in those days are in fact actual proper classics now, which is even more depressing. But I would just like to quickly thank channel sponsor Lancaster Insurance, the classic car insurance specialist since 1984, for making this video possible and for helping keep the lights on here in Furious Towers and covering the Furious fleet. Now, as I say, the spec on cars back then, which is what we grew up with, was basic. No sat-nav, just a radio cassette and big speakers that you added yourself, because the speakers and radios that came with them were terrible, so you personalised it by cutting great big holes for your 6x9s and your 4-inch speakers and the lovely door cards and the replaceable rear parcel shelves. Yeah, it's what we did back then. If you're really fancy, you had a pull-out stereo, so when you parked up, you take your Alpine or your Pioneer, yank it out on its front face handle and walk around with a 2-kilo boxy metal handbag. It was a status symbol back then. It was cool, trust me. There was no remote or central locking, nothing electric. The air conditioning is open a window manually, if it will. Crikey, that's stiff. This car though is the climate control edition because we've got quarter lights. And these came in handy the first winter I had this car because I couldn't turn the heater on. And on a frosty morning after breaking in, because yes, it was easier to get a wire coat hanger and break in than it was to de-ice the locks, and no, I'm not telling you how to do that. I would angle these towards the windscreen, set off in my gloves, hat and multiple scarves and jumpers, and scratch the ice off the inside of the windscreen as I drove. Good times. Now, my friends at the time with Minis, and these days we call them classic Minis, back then we just called them Minis, they would often conk out on wet days because after going through puddles it would knock out the distributor and the HT leads. And every car had problems with the points would just close up and you'd lose the gap. So until electronic ignition stuff came on in the mid-80s, and we were still driving a few of us 70s cars back then who suffered with this kind of thing, that was a common problem. Everything went rusty regardless of the make, and cars were breaking down all the time, so roadside fixes were completely the norm. I had a Mark III Escort with an aftermarket sunroof. Remember those things? And that didn't latch down properly, so anytime I went over sort of about 50 miles an hour, it would pop open. So every day I'll be driving down the motorway, one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on the ceiling to try and keep it shut, or at least stop it blowing away. Later on, I had an Alpha 33, again sunroof problems, that leaked like crazy. So anytime it looked like rain, I'd have to rush out and put bin bags over the seats to try and avoid getting wet trousers next time I drove it. That car also had problems with the windows falling into the door all the time, so when I sold it, the glass was propped shut with planks of wood. You don't get that these days, do you? Back at a similar time, my brother had an MGB with a Webasto sunroof that leaked so badly, I remember a passenger getting out of it one day with a carrier bag over her head to try and keep her hair vaguely dry-ish. You tell kids that today, you think you're making it up. Was it what we wanted? No, absolutely not. Did it make us more resilient and ready to tackle the world and take on anything? Absolutely. Now, I asked the internet for people's best memories of their first cars back in the day, and boy, did the internet deliver. thank you very much for your comments. So let's dust off those rose-tinted glasses and get ready for some Gen X and elder millennial nostalgia. And remind any 17-year-olds nearby, they don't know how lucky they are and they don't know they're born. So I'll put this post out across the social medias, and your memories were as good as mine. And there's a lot of shared memories. A lot of the things people came back with I remember so well, if not with my cars, and many of them were frankly, then many of my friends' cars. I could add to this list so much more, and I probably will do as we go along. So first off, this is someone called Gavin. My first car was a van. The side door fell off if you opened it too quickly. The driver's window was propped up with a wooden batten. Yeah, check. As the mechanism was kaput. It was so slow, and the heater matrix was knackered, so you couldn't have any heat in winter. Yeah, I remember that as well. Never mind aircon. It was dreadful, and I absolutely loved it. And that is another common theme. There's fond reminiscences for these absolute piles that we all adored back in the day. Failing heaters was a really common thing. These days you might get failed air conditioning, but generally speaking, your heater will at least still work. Richard said, my first and second cars were Beetles, and though I loved them, I just remember being cold all the time. No heaters and no internal fan. Oh, such a common theme of extreme discomfort. You just relied on whatever the one little fan at the back could push forward, which wasn't much, and the quarter lights were open all the time to stop the windows misting up. Yeah, those were indeed the days. Now, with my cars, I've got many stories of water ingress. Mike here, though, he did really well with this, though. Braking and getting a tidal wave of water over the ankles coming from the rear seat, though the water usually escaped then through the rusty floor in the front. Or the badly installed cassette player that used to speed up in time with the acceleration. Yeah, that's a fun one. You have to remember, because back in the day, and first time cars generally are at the newest 10 years old, more likely around 20. So if you were learning to drive in the 90s or the early 90s, your cars were probably coming from the 80s or perhaps even the 70s at the extreme. And the radios that came with them were generally absolute rubbish, if at all. So the first thing you'd do, you'd rush out and go and buy yourself a decent radio, a Pioneer, a Kenwood if you push the boat out, an Alpine. Personalising your car with the stereo back in, well, right up until the mid-noughties was such a big thing. A big part of owning your first car was, you know, cutting holes in the rear parcel shelf, cutting holes in the beautiful door cards to fit a pair of 6x9s and a subwoofer. Oh, happy days. Now we have a Fiat-loving Gavin. My first car was great. A Fiat 127, of course. Now, Gavin does own quite a lot of Fiats. People probably won't know the wonder of the yearly rising black tide line and more desperate welding for the MOT took place. Yeah, I think we're all familiar with that if you're more than like 25 years old. Yeah, weld it, plate it, smother it in underseal. Other oddities were wipers which randomly stopped when it rained heavily, useful, Q fiddling with the bullet fuses, there were only 6 in the car, and a bit of silver foil from Wrigley's chewing gum. Oh god, yeah, the connections don't quite work, get some chewing gum wrapper and try and bodge it. Oh, and towards the end of its life, reverse stopped working when it was hot for a couple of years. A hairline crack in the plastic thingy on the selector, 50p fix, but you got to do it. But then everything was a 50p fix, and if you couldn't afford 50p that week, it didn't get fixed. Yeah, so the reverse was quite interesting when meeting a car somewhere. I say you can never avoid forcing them to reverse. That's a real power move actually there, Gavin. Yeah, forcing your forward agenda on them. Oh, I'd actually forgotten, I also had a gearbox malady in this very car. The gearbox thingamy-bob on the bottom of the gear stick on this car fell out in Maidstone's one-way system, and the car was jammed, I think, in 3rd gear. So that was interesting in the stop-start of one way. I got stranded. My dad had to come and help me out and rescue me. So yeah, bits falling off, very, very common back in the day before, yeah, everyone drove sort of financed or at least decent cars that didn't go wrong, because cars today just don't go wrong in the same way. Now, Sam, I as a Ford fan, particularly gear spec Fords, my first car was a 1982 Ford Laser Gear. Being a top spec gear, it had velour seats, ooh, velour, a passenger side mirror, luxury, alloy wheels, ooh, and a different soft feel steering wheel, and full instrument, and of course the coveted gear badge. It also had an air conditioner, which here in Australia, that's him, Australia, not me, is an absolute necessity, although sadly and inevitably it didn't work. It also had a manual choke. I bet not many people know what that is. Well, actually, yeah, that's an interesting question. That's another one for the socials. Put a picture of a choke up and ask if people know what it is. And despite being a gear, it had no power steering. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no power steering. Power steering and air conditioning strangely late to the party in most cars, certainly in Europe. I'm surprised. Simon, all the extra ventilation holes are a bonus. Yeah, keeps the airflow through and stops the car misting up quite so badly when the floor falls out. I think this person's name is Don. A Daihatsu Charade with a worn-out 1 litre diesel. They put a 1 litre diesel in a Charade. I'm amazed. You sure? Maybe it just sounded like a diesel. You could push it up a hill faster than you could drive it, and it would only do 60 mph downhill with the wind behind it. But it was my first car, and it led me to buying another one 22 years later. You never forget your first car. This is true, actually. It doesn't matter how bad it is. You always have a bit of a nostalgia kick for it. Paul, another one for manual choke. This thing's got manual choke in it. It's also got petrol reserve because I'm super posh. And no servo assist brakes in a Fiat Panda. Actually, Mrs. Furious's first car was a Polo, the bread van Mark II, and that had no servo assist on the brakes either because they designed it for left-hand drive, and when they converted it to right-hand drive, they didn't have room for the servo, so they just didn't bother. That thing was scary. Oh, Gentil, here we go. Gentil, who has a lovely 70s BMW and borrowed my SLK to take it to Rostival. Speak of the devil, literally, my first car was a white 1988 Polo L bread van, so very similar to Mrs. Furious's, in fact. Rusty and rough around the edges. You know, Mrs. Furious's was really tidy, it has to be said. I could select second and fourth gear without pressing the clutch, so extra non-worn synchro or extra worn clutch. The speakers were broken, so I put in some Sony X-Blood. Yes, big speakers for the win. Okay, Paul, first car back in 1988 was a rotten 1977 Vauxhall Viva 1256 SL. Paid the grand sum of £175 for it. So that was an 11-year-old car at this point. Setting off from the sitting light. First drive, clutch dumped, setting off from the traffic lights, and rips off the rotten gearbox mount. That was entertaining. So yeah, 11 years old, the gearbox mounts are rotted gone. That's incredible. Alex, Morris Marina 1300 Deluxe first car. Bought as a cheap runabout to get 18-year-old me mobile until I can get my Mini put back together. Yeah, that's another common thing. I nearly fell into that trap. I found an Austin, or Dad found an Austin Healey in boxes for basically the same price as this P6, and should definitely have bought the Healey because it was worth a fortune. Oh well. Paid £80 for it and I was done. It had van suspension on the back, so it was stiffer and higher than all that old gasser look that was popular in the 70s. I don't know, maybe in the 80s, I don't know when this was. Had an 1800 B series on the 1300 gearbox and back end and front suspension. Had great acceleration and interesting handling. Drove well until a corner happened, then it would try and kill me. Yeah, that was the thing back in the day, if you're 17, and you could modify these old cars so much more easily than a modern car. They don't like being fiddled with, the new cars. One of the headlights broke loose from the rotten front panel. Okay, yep, it was the 80s. And it was wedged in with bits of stick and anything else that came to hand. Then I found out where the Marina got its name. It flooded inside whenever it rained, and I had to take the carpets out. My pal stole his brother's plasticine to stop the wind going up his leg through some holes in the floor. The speedo and the fuel gauge didn't work, but it didn't matter because neither... the speedo and fuel gauge didn't work, but that didn't matter because neither did the dashboard light, so I couldn't tell what was going on anyway. I often wondered about the MOT certificate I got with it. Despite all this, I actually like the Marina. Peter, man after my own heart here. My first car at 17 was a P6. A 3500 Auto, wow, V8, with Webasto roof in scarab blue, £325, blimey, 325 quid of magnificence. Apart from hot starting and then climbing a hill, at which point it would cut out due to fuel starvation. George, double declutching and then having to blip the throttle at junction so it didn't conk out. And then the decision between wipers or lights because you couldn't have both. Yeah. Kids today do not know how easy they have it. They can run lights and wipers and maybe even turn the fans on. Davey, my first car was a 3-year-old at the time Nissan Micra Twister Special Edition in 2001. No power steering, wind-up windows, no central locking, 2-speaker radio cassette. Only luck, got aircon on it. That's mad. Wow. It's Twister referencing the movie, so you got the fast blowing air or something. Wow. That's super luxury. I don't mind wind-up windows if I get air conditioning. Mark, my first car was this 1977 Ford Escort Mark II base model estate. Inner wings were so rotten I made repair panels out of galvanised steel and pop riveted them in, as I couldn't weld at the time. Yeah, that's definitely MOT friendly. The floor pans were rotten and had to be welded up every year for the MOT. Yep, cue the rising tide of black. Fitted a 1760 engine in it and a 1300 gearbox. Wow, that must be entertaining. Did the best I could for it by 1992. It was too far gone to carry on. Andrew, Mini Metro. Windscreen wipers stopped working when it rained. Emma, here we go. A 1986 Ford Fiesta Finesse. It was quite a flash one. Very fancy, very fancy. 4-speed gearbox, yep, no fifth. Choke that flooded the engine even when it was closed, so yeah, probably broken. Sunroof that lifted over 40, yep, remember that in the Escort. Constant soggy footwells and boot. Oh, steamed up windows all winter that would never clear. Yeah, we remember those days. Why did cars leak so much back in the day? Why were rubber seals so much worse when apparently rubber was better back then? Joseph, too many to list, but how about catching petrol from the leaking fuel tank when parked in my Avenger? Wow, so you stopped the car, you had to rush out and put a bucket under the fuel tank to catch enough petrol to drive home in. Yeah. Chris, vacuum-powered windscreen wipers that slowed down when you went faster. Yeah, what was the point of vacuum-powered wipers? They never worked. Okay, Barney, cold mornings having to use the handbrake to slow down and avoid using the clutch because then that would make the engine stall because the automatic choke was just so optimistic and would just cut out too soon. Oh, still got it and restoring it now. Okay, V480 GT from Threads. My friends were complaining about wet feet. Turned out the passenger side floor pan of my first car, an Opel Kadett D, aka Mark 1 Astra over here, was water soluble and therefore water permeable, letting in the rain. Also manual choke, ignition point. God, a number of times you'd find cars turned off and wouldn't turn on again because the points had closed up. You had to jump out with some screwdrivers and quickly twiddle the points to make them the right gap again, and suddenly it would run again. Wind up windows if the cable didn't break. Leaky seal on the brake master cylinder, so the brake pedal was a bit spongy. And this was the Luxus version of the Kadett, so it had intermittent wipers and a clock. Yeah, I need to do a video entirely about special editions back in the 80s and 90s when, yeah, you paid extra for a special edition and you got a clock on a sticker. Wow. And thought yourself lucky. Yeah, Freedom Motoring. Yeah, again, another one, scraping the ice off the inside of a 16-year-old Escort windscreen in 1996 because the heater wasn't working. Yeah, why were heaters so rubbish? Oh, again, Simon Monk. Just how rubbish the heater headlights and wipers were. Winter motoring was full-on Arctic adventure. Yeah, you dress up like you're going into the Antarctic and you've got sled dogs pulling the thing just to try and stay warm when you're driving. Okay, this is a good one. Okay, so this is talking about a manually pumped windscreen washer where you push the pump on the floor and the bulb for the driver's floor pump for the screen washers would freeze and split in winter and then flood the carpets when it's thawed out. Happy days, better than the bus, but only just. Anthony, don't think it'd make anyone feel too hard done by, but no power steering, no aircon, no electric windows, would probably feel grim today. But back in then, you had wheels, and that's all you cared about. But as this last picture shows, had to improvise some protection when the sunroof started leaking. Yes! You had to, yeah, another win for the gaffer tape fix on the sunroof. I did that to my Alpha 33 in the end to try and stop the water coming through. My Corsa B had a glove shelf, not a glove box. Wow, that's a low spec one. So everything fell off it constantly and the horn sounded like an asthmatic donkey. Oh, this is going a bit old school. I guess maybe a marina owner again or a miner. They won't understand greasing kingpins every 1,000 miles. Or the choke, yeah, greasing kingpins. Another video to do is I'm going to come back to is going through some vintage owner's manuals and the maintenance routines you needed to do back in the day. God, and I'm talking sort of 50s and earlier, then that was hard work. And last one, a 1964 Wolseley 1500, a very cool car, has to be said. No synchro mesh, so not even no fifth gear, no synchro on the gears, blimey. Vacuum pump screen wash, so you have to pump it and pump it and pump it, and eventually you get some pressure up and it blasts the water out. And drum brakes all round, so it would stop eventually. So this is the thing, these cars were, in modern terms, absolutely terrible. But we loved them because they were ours. And it got us out from home, it got us to go and see our friends, we had independent. And maybe people have kind of forgotten that little aspect of the car. It's not about showing off and having the best car, it's having a car and having your own ability to get where you want to go. And then maybe make it your own, add the radio, add the stickers, do whatever else you want to do to it to make it your car. It doesn't matter if it's petrol, diesel, electric. It doesn't matter if it's yours, it's great. And I think that is kind of the joy of classic motoring, and maybe that's why the resurgence of 90s and noughties cars, not just nostalgia, but younger people driving these cars as well, because you do have more option to fiddle with them, to change them, to make them your own, to personalise them more than a modern car. But when it comes to that cold winter morning and you're just walking out to your, say, 10-year-old 2015 car and you just blip the button and the door opens and you push the button or turn the key, the engine starts and you fire up the fans and the aircon, the screen instantly demists. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that as well. But yeah, it does kind of feel like having these trials and tribulations make you a little bit more hardy and a bit more kind of forgiving and ready for the world. If you have everything handed to you, life's too easy. You're never really ready to challenge yourself. And that was sometimes a bit of a challenge, but we got through, we survived. I've got to say though, I never drank water from a hose because that would just taste weird. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you have more memories of your first car back a few years ago when things were not as luxurious, then do please share them in the comments below. Did you have ice scraping from inside the windscreen? Did you have windows that fell off, sunroofs that leaked, floors that fell out? Or worse, did you have worse? I think my least reliable car was my other P6, where the reason I put a different engine in it was every time I turned the car off, the distributor would move in its entirety and I had to jump out with a 9/16 socket on an extension bar and reset the timing of the car because the gear was so worn. Yet we loved these cars. Anyway, right, thank you for watching. As always, like and of course subscribe, and if you enjoyed this video, please do share it with your friends. Enjoy the rest of your day and goodbye.